I mean, the size of that boat, at what point do they realise that actually, if they have like 50 of them, they can just line them up and walk across the channel?
We haven't agreed to this. This is not some national mission that everyone's, consented to. On the contrary, this has been a sort of nightmare. It's been forced upon us against our will.
That modern art is created by people who are very deeply mentally unwell. It's then judged by other people who are mentally unwell. And this is why most normal people don't understand it.
Hello and welcome back to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every episode by Chris Snowdon from the IA. How you doing, Chris?
I'm all right, joining you from shore and by sea today, as apparently it's so hot that your office has been condemned.
Essentially, yes. This is the first office/studio we've been in a while that doesn't have air conditioning. So that has really been terrible timing for our output at the moment. But nevertheless, it's good to see it, even if it is in these little blankety-blank screens. It's also very good to see in the other screen, Patrick Christys from GB News. How are you doing, Patrick?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Cheers for having me back. It's an absolute pleasure to be here to set the world to rights again.
Exactly. And it's a good week to do that, Patrick, because one of the issues that you yourself have covered a lot at GB News is the illegal migrant question, the small boats, although they're not so small anymore. This week, we marked a new record in, 230-something migrants on one single dinghy, the mega-dinghies, as they're now being described, larger capacity than your average EasyJet flight, which has led to all kinds of questions about whether or not Labour's plan to smash the gangs is working. You yourself have done a bit of reporting from Calais in terms of the people smugglers as well as the migrants that are coming across. Were you at all surprised that there has now been this escalation, it feels like, in the small boats crisis? Even if the numbers are coming down on last year, it's clearly not going away, is it?
No, absolutely not surprised at all. I mean, you only have to look at the size of the camps that are out there. There's no reporting that they've got any smaller. So the queue is exactly the same size. It might just be taking them a little bit longer in that queue. I mean, the size of that boat, I must admit, when I first saw the picture, I thought it was like a joke AI picture. I didn't think it was real because it's just like an impossibly long dinghy. And then obviously it turns out to be real. But at what point do they realise that actually, if they have like 50 of them, they can just line them up and walk across the channel? And what got me as well was that like Kay Burley, who obviously managed to maintain a fabulous level of impartiality while she was presenting Sky News, she was like, "Oh, I've seen more people at the queue in the 5 items or fewer aisle." The thing that really annoyed me about that was that she spelled aisle wrong. And it just made me think, well, okay, Kate, fine. But if you look at the fact that like 3,000 have crossed in the last 3 weeks or something, if they all came at once and they were coming towards Kay Burley's house, you might think she would take it a little bit more seriously. Like she might start to say things like, "Oh, hello, is that the police? There's an invasion." But no, she's not doing any of that. She's just, it's yet to touch the Waitrose in her particular Cotswold village. So that seems to be all right, doesn't it, for Kay, I think?
Absolutely. And Chris, I saw you weighed in on this subject on X last night. I think in response to Andy Burnham's statement that we need to share the burden out more evenly in terms of illegal migrant/asylum seekers. So what was the gist of your very important intervention there?
Well, Burnham was actually saying we should send them to the Cotswolds and so on, spread it out, which if you accept the idea that we have an obligation to accommodate tens of thousands of these people, I suppose is fair and just actually. But my point was we haven't agreed to this. This is not some national mission that everyone's consented to. On the contrary, this has been a sort of nightmare. It's been forced upon us against our will, and we don't really want to play our part. Insofar as we are prepared to play our part, it's been paying taxes to have these people detained and deported, I would have thought. I'm not sure what's happened to Kay Burley. I don't know whether it's audience capture or a brain injury, but since leaving Sky News, I mean, obviously she's free to say what she wants now, and unsurprisingly what she wants to say is just a lot of very flat-pack left-wing opinions. But she seems to be getting a bit like, John McTernan on Twitter, who I think is basically just trolling people now by pretending to be sort of a communist. But I don't think she's trolling anyone. Maybe she's just trying to maximise the Twitter revenue now that she's not working full-time. But she said she's been saying some incredibly stupid things in the last few weeks. And I'm a bit concerned that she might have taken a blow to her head, maybe from a horse or something. I don't know. Someone should look into it. I'm concerned for her well-being.
And Patrick, from the time that you spent in Calais, looking around these camps, looking around the whole kind of trade in people smuggling, was there anything in particular that sort of surprised you, or you think would surprise the public if they did happen to see the reports that you made from there?
Well, I mean, I just think how incredibly easy it is to track down people smugglers. So they advertise on TikTok, and then you make contact with them on TikTok by just pretending to be like a young Eritrean man. And then they'll give you a WhatsApp number. And then when you look at their WhatsApp profile picture, it's almost always just the Ayatollah or like some young Afghan bloke in a mask, or their WhatsApp story will just be like ISIS execution videos. Nice bunch, really. And then, so that's the kind of people that are bringing things across. Also, the boats, you can buy them online from a Chinese website, and you can have them manufactured to order, which is why you've ended up with these huge super yachts. And then, of course, it's then very easy to trace exactly where you need to be and exactly what time to get these boats. My point there being is that I refuse to believe that the French could not be doing much more about this, especially in light of the fact that we see the 230 people on that boat. There'll be about another 100 people who were told to get on that boat who didn't manage to get it. So if you take that to its natural conclusion, then you've had about 330 people mobilizing at the same time, walking through a particular part of northern France to get to a little bit of beach. And the idea again that the French police couldn't have seen that coming at all or anything is ludicrous. And then also, again, it's just the role of the charity workers in all of this. I know that people have a bit more insight into that recently with, some of the citizen journalists, or whatever you want to call them, that are out there. But these are almost always kind of middle-class women or British university students, female British university students, who go over there and think that they're doing the Lord's work and then don't appear to have any shred of self-awareness whatsoever about the threat to other women that a lot of these people sadly pose. But it's just the scale of it. Like I said, like they're not, that it's all very well and good them saying, well, boat crossings are down 43%. Well, okay, the wind has been going in the wrong direction for a lot of it. And how big are the camps? If the camps haven't got any smaller, then they're just filtering through at a slightly slower rate, aren't they?
I think that's an important point. And it's interesting. There's been a lot of people following in your footsteps, Patrick. One, Chris Philp, an enterprising young citizen journalist / shadow home secretary who was down there recently, seeing exactly what you alluded to there, which is despite these hundreds of millions that have been given to the French, the gendarmes just kind of standing back when all of this is taking place. And I know you've actually spoke to some of the people trying to make the crossing or waiting to make the crossing. What was your kind of measure of them when you actually kind of spoke to them eyeball to eyeball?
Well, I find it absolutely fascinating how prepared they are to leave their wives and children in war-torn countries. And in terms of how they afford it as well, there was an Ethiopian bloke I spoke to who just said, like, without any shred of self-awareness or anything like that at all, that his parents just keep giving him the money. So, like, he had like sodden shoes on because he'd not managed to make a boat trip that day. And I was chatting to him and I was like, so how do you afford this? Like, I would just get quoted like normally about 1,300 euros in order to go and make the boat crossings. And he tried and failed like 4 times. So it's quite a lot of money now for a bloke who's currently living in a tent in the woods in France. And he was like, yeah, well, my mum and dad just keep sending me the money. I mean, there is something as well that I think probably should be noted about all this, which is that like the government last night at the time of recording announced, oh, great, we've shut 13 more migrant hotels here. But actually they are creating an even more dangerous situation at the minute because whether or not they manage to set up these former military barracks, which is going to be completely open to people coming in and out, there are loads more HMOs. And we saw a tiny village in Wales yesterday. They woke up to discover that their old village hall has now been renovated and turned into accommodation for 13 illegal migrant families. But they've not been processed yet. So now we actually have a situation where these illegal migrants are getting to Britain and they are being released into our communities even quicker than they were before. There's no processing, and they're getting an HMO in many cases almost immediately, which is actually an even better situation for them than finding themselves in a travel lodge in Packard. So yeah, I mean, this is the incentives for them have actually got better, not decreased.
Yeah, when the government sort of heard all the protests outside migrant hotels and the people complaining about migrant hotels, they kind of focused on the word hotel as if that was what people were worried about. Whereas I don't think people liked the fact that we were paying for them to be in a hotel, but that wasn't a real concern. It was the migrants that we didn't really want. And so they were celebrating on Twitter about, we've moved so many migrants out of the hotels, but they've moved them onto planes to go home. They've moved them into people's communities. So I don't really think that's improved the position. On the charities, I'm kind of fascinated by some of these charities, Care for Calais and so on. And Patrick's coverage from Calais when he tried to speak to some of the charities who are hanging around, literally giving out literature in Arabic, how to cross the channel. I mean, who knows what goes through these people's minds? Maybe somehow they can convince themselves that these are women and children, old people, even whilst seeing and speaking to a bunch of young men. I don't know, but I don't think that's a charitable purpose. I don't think assisting illegal migration should be a charitable purpose. I think it actually should probably be illegal. So I don't understand who's giving them money. I dare say they get quite a lot of money from the state, but I believe they get quite a lot of money from people, public donations, probably people from Brighton and places like that, where, the government is very reluctant to put out crime statistics about asylum seekers, isn't it? And until it does, I'm just going to have to go on noticing. Maybe my Twitter feed is slanted towards these stories, but I've seen 4 stories at the start of this week of Afghanis mainly being convicted of rape, mostly of children. And this is happening so often that I have to assume that these people are greatly overrepresented in the rape figures, and in particular the stranger rape figures. A stranger rape used to be extremely rare, to the point where the authorities would educate people about the fact that if you are going to be sexually assaulted, it will almost certainly be by someone you know. In Brighton alone, in recent weeks, we've had 3 rapes. We've had the conviction of 3 migrants for a particularly disgusting gang rape, all on the beach, all late at night, all involving what I suppose we'd call vulnerable women. In other words, women who are pissed or on drugs. And this is the modus operandi, just to kind of seize and isolate women late at night who've had too much to drink, take them on the beach where it's dark, and rape them. And, some people might find it poetic justice that this is happening in Brighton, an area which tends to vote for parties that want to have more of these people. But it just seems to me that, with all the problems in the country, the government has just chosen to add on this extra, completely optional problem of having a load of dubious, potentially violent, misogynistic men roaming around, costing us a fortune and filling up the prison cells. And it is completely optional, because I really don't see how it's not preventable. I can see why the French aren't going to help, because let's face it, if the boot was on the other foot, we wouldn't be going out of our way to stop these people leaving the country. We'd be happy if them go anywhere, especially France. So it's kind of pointless giving them hundreds of millions of pounds. The solution is simply to detain and deport, and you detain them. And I don't know, if we need to build some cheapo kind of prison out of concrete blocks on the south coast, that could be done fairly easily, even with our ridiculous planning laws. But you build, the point is, you're not going to imprison 40,000 people a year, obviously, but you don't need to. You imprison a few hundred. You let them keep their phones so they can keep in touch with their friends in the Calais jungle, and they can tell their friends about how awful it is being in an English detention centre where they will stay until they agree to be deported.
The things that could be done even under the existing legal structure haven't really been done. And just that fundamental principle of, if you enter the country illegally, you will be punished
deported, rather than rewarded.
You can't claim asylum. If the first act of being in this country is to break the law and to violate the borders, then
you go straight to the big house. Yeah,
you would think. But it is interesting, Chris, talking about that kind of like naivety amongst liberal left people about the sexual violence part in particular, because a few years ago, or even now, it's quite common to read like an Amnesty International press release about just how bad and entrenched the misogyny is in a place like Afghanistan. Like ranks dead last on every conceivable measure of women's well-being, sort of place where a woman is sexually assaulted and she's punished or killed rather than the perpetrator. Like, we know all of this. But as soon as they pay a people smuggler and end up on the English South Coast, all of that would just melt away. Like they're born a new man, and this they wouldn't possibly bring it with them.
Yeah, because they're British. Yeah.
Exactly. Especially like about 10 years ago, there was this constant talk about rape culture. Like the idea Britain had a rape culture because of like lads mags and dapper laughs. And even though your average working class man didn't realise it, he was actually kind of primed to be some sort of sexual abuser. You've got a country like Afghanistan, which has a much greater claim to having something resembling a rape culture. And yet that is not a factor in their thinking.
Yeah, if it was Afghani women coming over in their thousands, I'd be a lot more sympathetic, and that would sort of make sense. But I don't really get what Afghani men are running from.
Or running towards, I suppose, is more the question at the moment.
Yes, exactly.
Anything to add to this, Patrick, before we move on?
Just as well, it's really seriously worth noting that the issue of people coming over in the back of lorries hasn't gone away. In fact, I suspect that it's got a lot worse. And I covered a story where there was a lorry firm that's based in Essex, and the driver had got back to the depot, and the depot was full. So they said to him, "Okay, just pull into the lay-by nearby." And he did, and like 5 lads just climbed out the roof of his lorry. He was promptly arrested for human trafficking, and then obviously released quite quickly. And they realised that how they'd got in was that they'd cut through the roof of the lorry. And they didn't think that this would be a problem for the lorries. They didn't have to reinforce the roof because you go through various different scanners and checks on the French side. But it turned out that apparently the French don't have a CCTV camera or a scanner that examines the top of the lorry. So they couldn't see that they basically slashed their way through the top. So this is obviously happening all the time. And then I spoke to another lorry company who I will not name, who said that when you get found with migrants, is that right? Even though you obviously haven't put them there, really, in most cases, you wouldn't have put them there. You don't want them there. You get fined. The lorry company gets fined. So what they are now telling their drivers to do is to, once you make it through to Dover or Folkestone or whatever, is just pull over about 10 minutes after you arrive there, get out, go for a coffee, right? And then the lads can scarper. And then you can, come back in having not seen anything, not aware of anything, and you carry on with your journey. And this will be happening. This will be happening every single day. There's something like 9,000 lorries come through that particular border every single day, and it doesn't take a genius to work out what the numbers there could be in terms of people coming across illegally. So that is a big thing. And I covered a court case once. From a bloke who did one of the old classics, Chris, which was just sexually assault a young vulnerable girl in Britain, and they had no idea how he'd got into the country. He'd been there for a couple of years, and it was almost definitely because he came in the back of a lorry and just didn't reveal himself, for want of a better phrase, until a couple of years' time. So this is obviously going on all the time.
Did you see the story this week of yet another Afghani who had raped, I think, a 13-year-old who was supposedly an Afghani translator? So he had come over, I assume, in the big wave that was kept secret with a super injunction, the massive cock-up where the spreadsheet was released and all this kind of stuff. So he'd come over, I guess, along with, 20,000 other Afghanis at the end of the war. But he needed a translator for the entire court case. So we're being taken for a ride, aren't we? Let's face it. It's very easy to take the British state for a ride.
It's darkly comic at times, all of this, isn't it? Should we talk about what feels like a related topic, which is vape shops, but also betting shops, Chris? This is something else that Andy Burnham has been discussing this week, saying that he wants to get on top of the death of the high street, the fact that there are too many betting shops, too many vape shops as he sees it, wants to give new powers to local authorities to be able to stop the proliferation of these businesses. You wrote a piece for your Substack. I wouldn't say it was in defence of vape shops or betting shops necessarily, but just talking about what is the real driver of this and looking at some of the factual inaccuracies in Burnham's case. Do you want to tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, Burnham is basically conflating two different things. He's conflating the rise of dodgy vape shops and barbershops, which everybody has noticed and everybody strongly suspects with good reason, run by people who are up to no good. Money laundering seems to be one of the main allegations, but also selling drugs, selling illegal cigarettes, illegal vapes and so on. And the massive proliferation of barbers in particular doesn't seem to be proportional to the amount of hair in the country. And I mean, even where I am, which is a relatively small place, we have a lot of so-called Turkish barbers, and a fair few vape shops. But he's mixing up that issue that people have, I would say, fairly legitimate concerns for, and no one can really understand why they don't clamp down on, organised crime operating in plain sight. He's conflated that with betting shops and amusement arcades, aka adult gaming centres, which are, highly regulated businesses that, if anything, are in decline. And Burnham said that betting shops have proliferated. They just haven't. They've absolutely collapsed in number. The number of bookies has fallen by more than a third since 2019, when there was a clampdown on the old fixed odds betting terminals. There's been hundreds more closures this year as a result of racial from accounts doubling the betting duty. So the idea that we even need to stop betting shops opening is ridiculous, because nobody is trying to open a betting shop. They are all being closed as soon as the leasehold ends. So he's mixing up these two different things. Well, one is like a genuine crime issue, and the other is just that people in the Labour Party don't like people gambling, and they want to reduce the number of venues where people can gamble. And I don't think he should be doing this. And it's kind of insulting, in fact, to the betting industry that he's lumping them in with dodgy kind of, Syrians running dubious vape shops. To be fair, on the vape shop and barber shop issue, I guess giving local councils more power to stop them opening up could be a good thing if they are genuinely unable to do this at the moment. And it seems to me, from what I've heard, speaking to the police and some convenience store owners on this, that the ownership of these shops is quite hard to pin down for some reason. And the police and trading standards will close down a dodgy vape shop for selling to kids or whatever, but then it immediately changes hands, usually to a cousin or a brother or something. And it just becomes difficult to stop. Now, whether in practice the local authorities are going to get any better at this just because they can deny planning permission in the first place, or it's easier to deny planning permission, we shall see. But there is really no need to be applying the same thing to amusement arcades and betting shops unless you're just morally opposed to people betting on machines. I say that the numbers are in decline anyway. The numbers of amusement arcades have slightly risen, but only because it fell before the pandemic. They're still at relatively low levels. It's just that people like David Lammy and Dawn Butler keep going on about the issue all the time and moaning about how many of these shops are available. I'd say the aim to permit, which is the thing they're trying to get rid of for gambling venues, was introduced by Blair in the 2005 Gambling Act. And basically the reason was they wanted to sort of bypass local NIMBYs and local puritanical councillors who just had a moral objection to gambling, because they wanted the industry to grow, and they wanted it, the days when, people were supposed to feel like they walked into a brothel when they walked into a bookies was supposed to be over, and we're supposed to have a bit of a mature relationship with gambling. Now, obviously, we've regressed on that front, and it depends how important you think local power is, whether you think it's fair for the central government to be essentially overriding local authorities. I think it is often needed. I think you do need to rein these people in sometimes, because otherwise they'll just stop any kind of development. But the fact of the matter is, it's irrelevant in this particular instance of betting shops. I don't understand why people keep going on about it. I don't understand why people can't look at the basic facts about how many betting shops there are and see that it is an industry in decline. And indeed, the high street is in decline to a large extent, or at very least it is evolving. It's going to have to, because it's been seriously damaged, firstly by supermarkets and then by the internet. And the point I was making in my article is people just need to get used to this. The idea that suddenly a whole load of butchers, bakers and candlestick makers are going to pop up just because local councils are preventing some vape shop from opening is obviously absurd. You're just going to have more empty shops. Now, maybe some people would prefer to have an empty shop than a vape shop. In fact, I saw an opinion poll recently that suggested they might do. But that is not good enough. We shouldn't be having centrally planned high streets based on whether people like the thing that's being sold. If you don't like betting, don't go in a betting shop. If you don't like vaping, don't go in a vape shop. This is just pure puritanism. It's rather like the banning advertising kind of takes it out of sight of people who disapprove of it. But now we've moved on to like banning the physical location, so people don't need to think about it if they don't want to. It's if you really think about the implications of this, that we should only allow businesses to open if a majority of people approve of what it sells, then it gets pretty dystopian.
Well, I had quite an interesting exchange with a bloke who there's some kind of union of like small convenience stores or something. It's not their actual official name. That's basically what they are. And I had him on my show, and I said to him, "Look, and this guy was just a kind of like seemed like a normal middle class bloke who owned a corner shop somewhere in a rural village." And I said to him, "Look, it must frustrate you when you see this. Why can't we get these very obvious money laundering or criminal enterprises shut down? The kind of ones that you just see where a particular high street, I mean, there's one near me, there's a particular high street where there's like 7 or 8 of these venues. A lot of them as well just seem to have like, this like fruit and veg that's just out by the side of a road all day. They don't even make any attempt to advertise this as being fresh or whatever. It looks like it's like an aubergine with mange from Chernobyl that's outside the front. No one's buying any of this stuff. But that surely is some form of like pretense and helping with money laundering. You've got no idea how much stock they're selling. No one ever goes in and out of this shop. All these places. I said, why is it that we can all see this stuff, but the shops stay open? And he said apparently trading standards have no proactive force. So I would have to call them, I think, report my, hypothetically, like my local corner shop or one of these kind of, Arab supermarket type things, and say to them, look, I think this is dodgy. They would then ask me to provide some evidence for that. Well, I'm not going through their accounts, am I? So I can't really, other than the fact that I feel it in my bones. And then they probably wouldn't go and do anything about it. So I feel like that's something that should change, where like they have more proactive powers to be able to go into some of these quite obviously dodgy shops and say, and inspect it more, because they don't seem to do that. And I don't really know why. Because it's like, if you're not going to do that, then how is this issue going to stop? I'm just on that thing, Chris, about them just changing the name and reopening. I mean, it literally happened just down the road from me. There was, one of these kind of aforementioned supermarkets, and I did actually used to go in there and buy cheap fags, actually, back when before I moved on to the vapes. And one day I went, and there was a sign on, so it's closed. And it had been forcibly closed, and they must have been particularly dodgy because they actually got caught. And then it just reopened about 3 or 4 weeks later with a different name and a slightly different layout, but the same bloke running the shop. So, and again, it doesn't look like anyone's bothered to check that in terms of like the officials. So, yeah, I do find that quite surprising. But yeah, I mean, I'm in favour of them doing anything that can clamp down on dodgy shops. But yeah, like you say, lumping it with the gambling thing, though, I'm assuming that the reason why they don't really like gambling is not actually because they're worried about people's addiction or mental health or it ruining families, isn't it? Because they just can't tax your winnings.
Well, they tax the industry a lot, and they've doubled the tax for a large section of the industry, hence all these closures, hence Flutter going off to America to list on the New York Stock Exchange. All the obvious things that people warned about are happening. There's been 15,000 job losses in the betting industry in the last few years, and it's only going to continue. I mean, there won't be any bookies on the high street quite soon, so all these people have succeeded in their moral enterprise, but I just don't think those shops are going to be taken over by anyone else. I mean, we need to look also at the kind of the government's role in the decline of the high street as well, and indeed in stimulating demand for these dodgy shops. We've got a tax on vapes coming up in October, which will put £3.60 on a little bottle of fluid, which goes currently for £2 or £3, so well over doubling the price of vaping. That's bound to stimulate more demand for illicit products. At the same time, they're going to put a double tax on tobacco. Tobacco is already, a pack of cigarettes is already about £16, £17. Every year they put it up by the rate of inflation plus 2%. They're going to do twice that this year because supposedly they want to or maintain a differential between vaping and smoking. That's not going to work. It's just going to further increase the demand for tobacco. And then you've got the whole issue of business rates, which if the government was serious about trying to get some shops on the high street, and clearly there are some shops that can do okay on the high street, certainly for services, things that you can't buy online, coffee shops, for example, key cutters and that kind of thing. But once again, the government's greed is preventing that economic activity from taking place.
Just quickly on that, sorry, because it just struck me as you were saying the price of all this is going up by this much, this much, this much. As I understand it, the price of weed is not going up. And so people are, and they are essentially decriminalising it. You know, I mean, like if I will be willing to bet you any money that if I drew my curtains now and looked down the road, there's someone just smoking a joint. There's a bloke who just spends every single morning smoking weed and feeding the pigeons just outside, which is weird, but he's probably lonely or something. But no one stops him. The police don't do anything about it. So if you're clamping down on tobacco and on vapes, but doing absolutely nothing about the actual drug, and that's not getting any more expensive as far as I can gather, then, you know, what do you expect people to ultimately turn to when they go to, you know, they're being charged like 25 quid a packet of fags, and then the cheap option, the vape, becomes, you know, kind of unaffordable as well? Then, you know, is it not logical that they'll either go for obviously the kind of maybe more unregulated cigarettes or whatever, or just cannabis? I would have thought maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, fundamentally, there is demand for illicit tobacco because government has made smoking unaffordable for a lot of people. Now, some of those people have decided to quit or switch to vaping. The government is now making vaping unaffordable. So it is created the demand for these products in the first place. Even if you got rid of every dodgy vape shop that's selling illicit vapes and illicit tobacco, it would be sold somewhere else because the demand's not going away. It would go back to being sold in car boot sales and in pubs and indeed online. There's all sorts of ways of doing it. Similarly, if you got rid of all the barbers that are money laundering, they just open something else up and money launder. There's open a coffee shop and
Car
money
wash
launder,
or whatever,
second-hand car, exactly, car dealership. All they need is a business. It doesn't have to be a barber's, for God's sake. So we're just playing whack-a-mole, and it's the same old story, isn't it? Really, this is what all this comes down to, like so many things come down to, is we don't enforce the laws we already have, and so we create other laws. And so, like you say, trading standards are not being proactive. They would say they're too busy. The police say they're certainly too busy. And so rather than, you know, give them resources to do the job properly, and to be fair, it's a hell of a big job because of the amount of demand for these products, we just introduced new laws. So we're going to have plain packaging and display ban for e-cigarette fluid soon. Well, great. Yet another burden on small retailers. Small retailers, by the way, who are the ones who will tip the authorities off to these dodgy shops. And from what I've heard from some of these guys, the authorities still don't really do anything.
There we go. No, it seems like this one's going to run and run. It's funny, Chris, like you were saying about how the government focusing on the hotel bits of the migrant hotel. It does feel like they're focusing on the vape shop bit of the dodgy vape shops and the barbers bit. Before we ask our final two questions to Patrick here, Chris, do you want to sort of bring us our kind of junk science story of the week, I suppose, in the form of this study which has come out claiming that your intake of sugar in early life can determine whether or not you've got dementia? Because this seems to be a real honker of a study, in my layman's opinion, from what you've written about it.
Yeah, this is, I think, a new low for nutritional epidemiology, which it really is saying something, because nutritional science is such a bin fire of rubbish. Anyway, in fact, I read something this week saying that protein is actually bad for you now, despite what you said. If you want to live longer, eat less protein. So, yeah, the wheel of nutritional sciences goes round and round and round. People make lots of money out of it. But this is going back to, it's a bit retro, really, because it's attacking sugar rather than ultra-processed food. And so the headline on the BBC was that people who consume sugar early in life, and indeed in utero, before they're born, have much lower rates of dementia in later life. And I thought, well, how do you know that? Because that's got to be a long-running study, isn't it? To see people when they're born and wait until they're old enough to have dementia. And it turned out to be based solely on the supposed observation that people who were born in the early 1940s, when there's sugar rationing, have lower rates of dementia than people who were born after 1953 when sugar rationing was abolished. The initial assumption is reasonable enough that the second lot of people were consuming more sugar. But they didn't seem to take into account anything else that ever might have happened in these people's lifetimes, and why a different generation might have different health outcomes to another generation. And in actual fact, if you looked at the figures, it was actually the first group, the oldest group, who actually had lower rates of dementia. The researchers just made some adjustments to the findings to make it look otherwise. And I thought this was astonishing that something like this could be published, because it's such a blatant conflation of correlation and causation. But it turned out to be just one of many, many studies published all by Chinese researchers, very often by the same group of Chinese researchers, who use exactly the same so-called methodology of just like before and after, the group that were born during sugar rationing versus those who were born after sugar rationing. And they claim that sugar early in life causes nearly everything, not just dementia, but cancer, heart disease, everything you can think of. And of course, this is totally fallacious. And I think I tweeted something along the lines of, you might as well say that being bombed early in life gives you lower rates of dementia. But life imitating art, I've then found a study which, based on, again, the same data set, saying that people who are exposed to blackouts early in life, and indeed in the womb, do have lower rates of dementia and heart disease. So you can clearly just use anything that happened in the early 1940s and claim a causal link with health outcomes 60 or 70 years later. And they were deadly serious about this. It wasn't some spoof trying to show how ridiculous the methodology was. They were saying, yeah, we need to restrict, people's exposure to light early in life.
Blackouts, less sugar, early exposure to violin songs, whatever it might be. Seems to explain.
Bombs. Gas masks. Wearing a gas mask early in life gives you lower rates of cancer.
Incredible. Patrick, unless you've got anything to add to that, should we go to our final two questions for you? The first, of course, being, I was about to say, if you had to have one ban, what would it be? But you're such a stalwart returning guest, you're probably on your third or fourth by this point. But yes, if you had to add another ban to your list of bans, what would it be?
You are a dictator.
People who loiter at pedestrian crossings. This is something that I've become increasingly annoyed by recently. So this is kind of almost like a twofold ban. So it's the people who stand when there's a perfectly good pavement and anywhere else actually where you could stand, and they decide to just plonk themselves right by the pedestrian crossing, usually on their phone like this. I'm driving because I'm a monster. And I'm there, am I stopping? Am I not stopping? So I've stopped now, maybe I've got my baby in the back who's crying. We need to be somewhere. We're late for something. I've got things to do. You're just there. Are you crossing or not crossing? So I would ban them from doing that. The other thing I would ban is, and it's similar to this, is then once you have stopped and they go to cross the crossing, people who don't do the kind of courteous, what I would call like the kind of pedestrian crossing shuffle, which is like, oh, yeah, no, thank you. I think you get a bit of a move on. Those people that then think, well, this is fine. You've stopped now. I can take an hour to walk on. That really pisses me off. And they don't even, they might do a little thank you and stroll, they've got headphones in. It's like, what do you think this is about? I bet in that walk, wherever you've just come from, that you've decided to make that bit the slowest bit of your walk. Why? Well, you should, I've stopped. I'm in a big, essentially what could be used as a big metal weapon, actually. So have some respect. And they just go, so I'll take half an hour getting across here. No, and in Patrick Christys' Britain, that is where the pedestrian crossing snipers come in.
I did warn you about living in Abbey Road.
Honestly, yeah. Well, what's great about that, by the way, is that so Abbey Road, the famous pedestrian crossing there, has they're doing roadworks, and obviously because it's, I'm assuming they're done by the council, it's taken them about 6 months to do the roadworks that are crossing. So now the tourists assume that it can't be that one. So they're all at a different pedestrian crossing. Doing all the picture, of them walking like this at the wrong pedestrian crossing. And no one's telling them. No one's telling them. The other thing no one tells them is that Paul McCartney's actual house is about 2 roads down from that. Like, you could just go, forget the studios. Now, you could just go round to his house, and say hello to him pretty much, basically. But anyway, yeah, they don't get it, do they?
And very finally, Patrick, have you got a theory?
I've got a theory.
Yes, that all modern art is an expression of mental illness.
Oh, that's good.
So, I've lived this at the Tate Modern a couple of times there. There was one particular example that stood out to me of a woman who had feathers attached to her fingers and would put them across her face and then remove them and do this. And then every fifth or sixth time she'd scream. That was apparently art. But this is it. I mean, I fundamentally think that the modern art is created by people who are very deeply mentally unwell. It's then judged by other people who are mentally unwell. And this is why most normal people don't understand it, and why rich people spend so much money on it, because they assume that this painting can't actually be shit. Right, there must be some logic behind this, and that's why it's worth £1 million. But actually, what they are looking at is literally just what it looks like, which is paint smeared on a canvas by a man having a schizophrenic episode brought on by a critical meth addiction, who's used his penis as a paintbrush. And that is just it. That is what you're looking at.
That's beautiful. There's the clip for this week. I think that's one of the best we've had. Chris, any holes you want to poke in this theory, or you want to?
I've got nothing to add to that. I mean, it's obviously correct. Just saying what everyone's thinking.
Well, on that note, Chris, Patrick, thank you very much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Last Orders. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another spiked video. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, make sure you subscribe there and give us a glowing 5-star review. And if you'd like to get in touch with your questions or band suggestions, email us at lastorders@spiked-online.com.